Welcome everyone to our third session of the symposium. This session is going to be a roundtable discussion. The title is Research on Linguistic Minorities, Myths, Realities, Framing and Politics. I am Anna Hunt from QUESCREN. I will be moderating this session. So before we get into discussion, I'm going to present our speakers or our people who will be discussing today. And as I introduce them, I will also give them the opportunity to introduce their organizations. So we will begin with Éric Forgues. So Éric, since 2000, sorry, over here. Can I take this out? Should be able to. Hello. Okay, so since 2012, Éric Forgues is the Executive Director of the Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities. From 2003 to 2012, he was Assistant Director and Researcher at the same institute. His work focuses on the development of official language minority communities, governance, language of public services, linguistic engagement and mobilization, cultural events, and more recently on the production and dissemination of knowledge in French. And for Éric, do you have the microphone if you want to say a few words about CIRLM?
Donc, oui, je vais dire un petit mot sur l'Institut canadien de recherche sur les minorités linguistiques qui a fêté ses 20 ans cette année, en 2022-2023. L'Institut a été créé en 2002 sur papier, mais vraiment entré en activité en 2003. Donc, on a commencé vraiment ces activités. Le premier directeur de l'Institut, c'est Rodrigue Landry, qui a fait beaucoup de recherches sur la vitalité des communautés en situation minoritaire. Donc, Rodrigue Landry a été directeur de l'Institut jusqu'en 2012. Et puis, bon, moi, en 2012, j'ai pris la relève, si on veut. L'Institut a été créé suite à une entente entre Patrimoine canadien et l'Université de Moncton qui a permis d'accorder un fonds à l'Université de Moncton pour créer l'Institut. Et puis, l'Institut, en fait, vit sur et financé, les activités de l'Institut sont financées par les intérêts générés par le fonds. La mission de l'Institut, c'est de promouvoir une plus grande connaissance des communautés de langue officielle en situation minoritaire, une meilleure compréhension des enjeux prioritaires qui concernent les communautés. On est une petite équipe, 4 chercheurs, une adjointe administrative pour nous aider à faire la recherche. Il y a un réseau de chercheurs associés, hein, sans quoi on ne pourrait pas réaliser tous les projets. Il faut aller chercher les expertises là où elles sont. Hein, on ne peut pas être expert en tout. On a 5 axes de recherche, donc je vous les présente rapidement. Les populations vivant en situation minoritaire. Donc, on va analyser, par exemple, les données des mots linguistiques, des données de Statistique Canada, beaucoup. Le développement des communautés, donc les stratégies qui sont développées pour assurer l'épanouissement, le développement des communautés, puis les différentes mesures qu'on prend pour justement assurer le développement des communautés. Un volet qui porte sur la politique, l'influence politique, la gouvernance. Ça, c'est un sujet qui m'a tenu occupé. Toute la question de la gouvernance communautaire, comment est-ce qu'on prend des décisions collectives quand on est plusieurs organismes qui se consacreront au développement des communautés. Il y a plusieurs choses qu'on peut faire ensemble. Donc, il a fallu mettre en place des mécanismes de décision collective et pour justement d'essayer d'assurer une certaine cohésion des différentes actions entreprises par les organismes. Il y a toute la question des droits linguistiques. On n'a pas de juriste à l'intérieur de l'équipe, mais il y a quand même des choses qu'on peut faire. Par exemple, on a fait des projets sur l'effectivité des lois linguistiques. Ça peut être considéré d'un point de vue juridique, mais aussi d'un point de vue sociologique, de sciences sociales. Puis il y a différents facteurs politiques, sociaux qui peuvent expliquer le plus ou moins grand respect des lois linguistiques dans les différentes provinces. Puis aussi un volet sur la mémoire, l'identité, la diversité des communautés. Donc, par exemple, on va étudier les événements culturels, identitaires, les lieux de mémoire qui sont tout le rapport des communautés à leur propre passé. Donc, ça, c'est des choses qui nous intéressent. On ne fait pas vraiment des travaux historiens comme tels. On va regarder un peu la mémoire comme un fait actuel. L'Institut gère la revue de minorités linguistiques et sociétés. Je crois que Jason va nous en parler. Une revue bilingue en libre accès qui célèbre ses 10 ans. Je ne veux pas trop empiéter sur ce que tu vas dire. Anne Robineau, qui est avec nous aussi, qui, avec moi, gère la collection aux presses de l'Université Laval, Langue officielle et société, qui a publié récemment un ouvrage sur les 40 ans de la loi 101, vu de la perspective des Québécois d'expression anglaise. C'est un ouvrage assez volumineux. Si vous ne l'avez pas lu, je vous invite à le lire. Et sur le site web de l'Institut, vous allez trouver une base de données bibliographique qui est le pendant francophone de ce que le QUESCREN fait pour les anglophones, parce que le QUESCREN aussi, sur son site web, a une base de données bibliographique assez volumineuse. Puis, je vous invite à consulter le site web pour en savoir plus, icrml.ca. Voilà, merci.
Merci, Éric. Now I'll introduce Lorraine O'Donnell. Lorraine O'Donnell has a PhD in history from McGill, a master's in history, and a graduate diploma in community economic development. She is Senior Research Associate and Advisor at Quebec English-Speaking Communities Research Network, or QUESCREN, where since 2008, she has led day-to-day operations. Before that, she worked as an archivist, a researcher, a teacher, and a public historian. In 2015, she became an affiliate assistant professor with Concordia University's School of Community and Public Affairs. Lorraine's research focus is Canadian women's history and history heritage projects that involve help build communities. She has contributed to English-speaking Quebec history exhibits on the topics of immigration, Jewish and Irish communities, social movements, and house waves. Lorraine.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. So I already introduced QUESCREN this morning. I'll keep this brief. QUESCREN was established in 2008 as a project of the CIRLM. And we were Canadian Heritage funded CIRLM and encouraged it to extend its reach to cover more about the official language minority community in Quebec. They already were doing some and they wanted to build their capacity. So they developed a partnership with Concordia University. And we've never looked back. I've had the pleasure of working with Éric and Anne and others since then. As I mentioned this morning, our activities include mobilizing knowledge, so events like this, developing research tools, as will be discussed at the next session, researching and producing research documents, networking the English language education sector through our interlevel educational table, developing and supporting our researcher member group, managing multi-partner community-based projects, one of which will be described tomorrow at the community session, and training students. We now have 2 co-directors, Brian Lewis, who's in the room, and Chedi Belkoja, 6 staff and some students, and as of Monday, a 7th staff member. There are 69 researcher members in our network. In the interlevel education table, there's somewhere between 20 and 30 members, and we have an advisory board that just had a lunchtime meeting upstairs, and that's about a dozen people. So that's what we do, and I look forward to describing in a few minutes some of the issues and challenges that we face. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Next, we have Celine Cooper. Celine Cooper is the Managing Director of the Consortium of English Language CEGEPs, Colleges and Universities of Quebec. A former editor at the Canadian Encyclopedia, columnist with the Montreal Gazette, her writing, research, and policy analysis can be found in a range of publications. Celine is president and chair of the governing board for the Fraser Hickson Institute and former chair of the board of directors for the Association for Canadian Studies. She sits as a member of the advisory committee for English-speaking Quebecers, as well as QUESCREN's interlevel education table. ILET. She is currently serving as the co-chair of the program committee for QUESCREN's 2023 Education Vitality Forum, focused on enhancing Quebec's English language education network through collaboration. Celine holds degrees from Queen's University and York University and pursued doctoral studies at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto. Celine.
Thank you, Anna. And it is one of my great pleasures in this role to collaborate so closely with QUESCREN. And what Anna didn't mention is that I have the privilege of serving as co-chair of that program committee for the ILET conference alongside Anna. So thank you. So a little bit about the Consortium of English Language CEGEPs, Colleges and Universities of Quebec, where I serve as managing director. So this is an alliance of 9 English language post-secondary institutions in Quebec. I always try to do this from memory, but I'm going to read this just in case. So Bishop's University, Champlain Regional College, Concordia University, Dawson College, Heritage College, John Abbott College, Marianopolis College, McGill University, and Vanier College. So those are our 9 member institutions. And the establishment of the consortium in 2019 was really spurred by the need to research and address the high outmigration levels of English-speaking graduates from Quebec to other parts of Canada and around the world when it came time to start their careers, establish themselves. We know that there's a high outmigration level of those graduates. So that was why this group came together. I came on board in 2020, in the summer of 2020. We are now in the summer of 2023, and I feel like things are just getting off the ground. I think we're finally starting to gain some momentum, and I'm really pleased about that. The consortium is mandated to strengthen our research and institutional capacity related to the retention, employment, and success of English-speaking graduates from post-secondary institutions in Quebec. So what we're really looking to do is to build partnerships, to think of innovative solutions to build those pathways to employment for graduates here in Quebec. We're very grateful to receive funding from the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, and we enjoy the support of Bishop's University as fiduciary. And one of the last things that I'll just mention is that currently the governance structure of the consortium, our Assemblée des membres, is the principals and vice chancellors of the universities and the directors general of our institutions. So this is really a commitment at the highest level of leadership of these institutions, that this is something that they're committed to. And we're very fortunate to have their collaboration and support.
Thank you. And now we have Star Kuzviwanza from the Provincial Education Roundtable. Star is a policy analyst and researcher with a background in economics and technology policy. Star has previously worked as the policy lead for Quebec at Airbnb Canada and as a consultant providing policy analysis to organizations in private and public sector. She holds a Master of Public Policy from the Max Bell School of Public Policy and a bachelor's in economics and African studies from McGill University. And she has a presentation.
So I'll start off with who we are and what we do. So like I said, we are the Provincial Employment Roundtable, or PERT. This is a nonprofit multi-stakeholder initiative whose main goal is to aid in addressing the employment and employability issues that are facing Quebec's English-speaking community. So this organization was founded in 2020. It is an organization that is very new, right? It started during the pandemic. It was incubated by Yes Montreal, that I'm sure many of you know. Actually, if ACU was here, I'd say it's not Yes Montreal because they serve all of Quebec. And what's great about PERT is that the specific mandate was research and engagement. So what we do is we work to develop a deeper understanding of the challenges and problems in the employability and employment landscape for English speakers. We work to identify gaps in the data and improve the availability of information. And lastly, we work to develop solutions and policy recommendations. So what's really exciting about our research is that because we're funded fully by the Secrétariat aux relations pour les Québécois d'expression anglaise, is that we get the opportunity to really put forward our policy solutions directly to the provincial government, which is really wonderful because that means that our research gets to be seen at the highest levels of government, and we've already seen some changes already being taken into consideration by the government. The other thing that we do is engagement. So we work to foster an environment of engagement and collaboration between different stakeholder groups. We have roughly 50 stakeholder groups that are part of our sectoral table. So these are groups in education, employment service providers, we have employment employers, and then we also have regional organizations, and we also partner very extensively with the Regional Development Network. We work to mobilize resources and other solutions amongst different regions across Quebec. And as I mentioned, we work with governments directly for the benefits of our stakeholders. So since our topic today was myths, realities, framing, and politics, I decided to focus more specifically on the employment realities of English speakers in Quebec. So as some of you have maybe seen recently, there's been a bit of buzz around some of these new employment statistics that show the status of the English-speaking community currently with regards to employment. So this is what we've been working on. So just quickly, I won't go into too many details, but these are kind of the top headlines of the current employment realities for English speakers. So firstly, we know that the English-speaking community is now representing 14.9% of Quebec's population. Right? So it's a minority, but it's grown since the last census. And the majority of that growth in population is coming through English-speaking migrants. The other thing is bilingualism. So one common myth, right, is that English speakers are perhaps not bilingual and don't speak French, but the data actually shows differently. It shows that English speakers have high levels of bilingualism. So in fact, about 66% of English speakers in the last census reported that they were able to conduct a conversation in French. And this is a slight decrease actually in the rate of bilingualism among English speakers since the last census. Another thing that we focus on extensively is labor force participation. So we spend a lot of time looking at this number and trying to understand why that is and what is the meaning of this. So we know that English speakers have a labor force participation rate that is about 2.6% higher than French speakers. However, despite higher labor force participation, English speakers have a higher unemployment rate. So they have an unemployment rate that is 4% higher than French speakers. So this is a number that we spend a lot of time really puzzling over and trying to understand, and I'm hoping we can delve into deeper today. Lastly, income. As it follows with unemployment, higher unemployment leads to lower incomes amongst English speakers compared to French speakers. So you'll see when we compare after-tax total income and employment income, English speakers do earn less than French speakers. And thank you. I'll stop right there. And
thank you. So now we have Jason Luckerhoff, full professor in communication at the University of Quebec at Trois-Rivières. Dr. Jason Luckerhoff is managing editor of Linguistic Minorities and Society, which he will be talking about in a moment. He chairs Coalition Publica, a strategic partnership created in spring 2017 by Erudite and Public Knowledge Project, dedicated to the dissemination of research and scientific publication in the humanities and social sciences in Canada and worldwide. Publica is a Canadian initiative, part of an international movement striving to redefine the power relations within scholarly publishing in order to support the free circulation of knowledge in the transition towards open access and new research perspectives in the humanities and social sciences. Jason, want to say something about the journal?
Merci beaucoup. Alors, comme Éric le mentionnait, la revue Minorités linguistiques et société relève de l'Institut que dirige Éric. Et avant que j'en sois le directeur, il y a Réal Allard qui a fait la direction de la revue toute une décennie. Donc, c'est une revue en santé, bien reconnus, bien implantés dans le milieu à travers le pays que j'ai pu commencer à diriger il y a un peu plus d'1 an maintenant. Et donc, vous avez Éric qui est directeur de l'Institut. Il y a François-René Lard que vous avez entendu ce matin qui est responsable des comptes rendus de lecture aussi à la revue. Et on a un comité de rédaction sur lequel siège aussi Lorraine qui nous aide à choisir les thématiques pour les appels. Alors, la revue, c'est une revue scientifique bilingue, donc on accepte les publications en français, en anglais. Il y a certains numéros particuliers parfois où on va avoir des traductions. Alors, tous les textes seront à ce moment-là disponibles en anglais et en français. C'est une revue qui a pour objectif de faire connaître, mais ça, c'est important dans une perspective pluridisciplinaire ou même interdisciplinaire. Donc, en sciences du langage, en sciences sociales et humaines, les résultats des recherches qui concernent les minorités linguistiques et les communautés de langue officielle en contexte minoritaire au Canada. Donc, on n'a pas de perspective disciplinaire. On a vraiment une ouverture autant à la transdisciplinarité, à l'interdisciplinarité qu'à la multidisciplinarité. Donc, on peut accueillir des perspectives disciplinaires, mais elles seront diverses. Donc, on s'intéresse à des objets que sont les minorités linguistiques et les phénomènes qui entourent les minorités linguistiques. Et on s'intéresse aussi à cet objet-là dans différentes perspectives. Alors, par exemple, de temps en temps, on va s'intéresser à la santé et aux minorités linguistiques, au numérique et aux minorités linguistiques, et éventuellement, on serait intéressé à d'autres thématiques également. Alors, le mandat de la revue est en lien direct avec la mission de l'Institut canadien de recherche sur les minorités linguistiques. On veut produire et diffuser des savoirs sur la situation des minorités de langue officielle du Canada. Et évidemment, QUESCREN est un partenaire important parce qu'on veut travailler sur les minorités francophones à travers le pays, mais aussi sur les minorités au Québec. Donc, on parle autant des langues autochtones que des anglophones au Québec. Et à ce sujet-là, bien, vous avez devant vous, dans le panel, sauf moi, les 4 éditeurs d'un prochain numéro qu'on travaille présentement, au sein duquel numéro on va retrouver, entre autres, plusieurs présentations qui se sont faites aujourd'hui, où on va s'intéresser autant aux minorités anglophones au Québec qu'aux minorités francophones ailleurs au pays. Alors, il va être co-dirigé par les 4 personnes que devant vous et l'appel à texte va être mis en ligne sous peu. Alors, quelques mots sur l'évolution de la revue. Interdisciplinarity is valued. The research subjects must be directly related to linguistic minorities, and there have been some changes over the last year in accordance with the good practices of open access and Plan S. Anna talked about the Coalition Publica. So Plan S is one of the goals we have at Coalition Publica. The journal is released under a CC BY 4.0 Creative Commons license. What that means is that authors own their rights on what they publish. So they keep their rights. They can publish in other languages if they wish. They don't have to ask for permission to do so. As long as they give the reference, they're allowed to publish in other languages afterwards. And it's not owned by the Institute. The rights are not owned by the journal. They're owned by the authors themselves. So it's released in Creative Commons. It's also offered now as continuous publication. So what this means is as soon as an article is ready, if, for example, we have 3 articles ready, we can publish them in a first round of publication. And then when 3 others are ready, have a second round, and we can go up to 3 publications per issue. So we could have, for example, an issue that's published over 3 years, and then the introduction is published the 3rd year when all the articles are ready. So what that allows for quick publication, because sometimes you have the first authors who are ready with their papers, but then you have other authors who aren't ready. They're not even finished with the study itself. So sometimes they have to wait 2 years, 3 years before they're published. So we're trying to have every article published within a year now. So articles are being uploaded up to 3 times for each issue. All issues are thematic and include a Varia section to publish non-thematic articles. So we're always welcoming articles for that non-thematic section. And the issues are fully processed on Érudit, and the function to automatically generate PDFs and HTML are available. And you can find all our 22 issues on our website. And you can also find our call for papers. So for now, what we have is one call for papers on digital landscape and minority language communities, another one on the International Decade of the World's Indigenous Languages, another one on morphosyntactic and pragmatic variation in Francophone minority communities, and health in Francophone communities over Canada. And we'll add to that the issue that we're working on. So the four co-editors here will be signing the call for papers soon. And as soon as it's on the website, we'll be welcoming articles.
Thank you, Jason. So now we're going to get to the questions. So the way this is going to work is that we're going to have two questions that I'm going to pose to our speakers, and they will give their responses. And then at the end, we will have time for questions from the audience as well. Just a note on the time, we're slightly behind our very, very detailed timeline here. So the next question section, we're going to have 20 minutes to answer. So 4 minutes each, if that's okay. So our question, so what is it like producing or leveraging research on official linguistic minority communities? So I understand you do this in relation to your broader work, which may include development of policy and communities of practice. So I want to know about some of the issues and situations, and I will invite someone to volunteer themselves to answer that. So issues and situations around the research. So who would like to go? Or I can name.
A lot of the research that we're doing is based on this 2021 census. So I have a lot to say about research in this space, mainly because pretty much all the data that we rely on is just that. It's from Statistics Canada, right? And as you all know, the census is collected every 5 years. I see Yan nodding here, right? A very, very well understood problem with the CHSSN as well, right? Is that we don't have data available on an annual basis. So one of the biggest critiques I've heard of this 2021 census data is that this was 2 years ago, right? This was at peak pandemic, there was restrictions. Is the unemployment rate still the same, right? And that makes it even harder for us when we work with this data, because we're kind of dealing with issues around accuracy of like this data might not be real time. But when you look at the trends of how unemployment has been changing over the past 10 or so years, we see that English speakers have been having a higher unemployment rate, right? So if you look at all the data, right, that we're working on and you put the research as a whole, we know that there are challenges within this community. But when you start to zoom in a little bit, that's when you see that there are so many gaps, right, especially on the quantitative side. So I think that makes the qualitative side of this research a lot more important. And I know there's qualitative researchers here on this panel. And so we're trying to pivot a little bit, right? So try to put the quantitative, look at the census data, but then focus more also on the qualitative research to really add more color, right? Add stories, help people to really understand just who are these communities, how diverse they are, and that the challenges that they're facing are very real. And it's not just a number, right? 10.9 it's an important number, but there's a lot more to that.
Thank you. Next person who would like to answer? Lorraine?
I have so much to say. When we did our planning meeting, we ended up like getting into the topic. It was actually kind of fun. So what is it like producing or leveraging research on OLMCs? I'm thinking more and more these days of the research ecosystem. In other words, there's the research that is produced, and then there is the multiple systems that are interlocking that allow the research to be produced, but also, to use a kind of jarring word, consumed. And what is that world that we're swimming in? So I can talk about strengths. So there's a lot of research. If you go on the bibliography that Brendan O'Donnell has been producing for some 30 years, there are a lot of publications. We've got over 14,000 studies on aspects of English-speaking Quebec. Increasing funding for our unit, especially through the Secrétariat. Lots of researchers in different settings, academic, in the private sector, in community groups like PERT. Excellent research tools. I'm giving ourselves a bit of a pat on the back. increasing networking. So something we haven't talked about yet today, there's a community development plan being supported by Quebec Community Groups Network that has a data round table that I co-chair. And we're working on trying to coordinate the kind of work that the different groups are doing, sharing information, but also being proactive and thinking about what English-speaking communities need in terms of data and research, and really good research methodologies. Those are some strengths. But if I look at some of the challenges, the big word for me is politicized. This is a very, very politicized milieu. Sta already referred to myths. So what are some of the prevailing myths? Anglos didn't used to be diverse and then got diverse in the 1960s. Anglophones, there was always relatively lot of diversity among English-speaking Quebecers. Anglophones are wealthy. There's plenty of evidence to show that that's not the case now. But as a historian, I constantly make remind people that it was always a matter of an elite. There's always been poverty and a vulnerability in our English-speaking communities all across the province. Those are some of the myths. There's also, you may have noticed, a highly politicized environment, both provincially and federally these days. You know, Bill 96 provincially has been mentioned a bunch of times today. Bill C-13 at the federal level. I'll just put it this way. You know, interestingly, we just had our advisory board meeting and touched on some of these issues. How does a research network navigate this highly political environment? How do we support researcher engagement with community issues, which we've already seen? I mean, Richard Kessner talked about, you know, kind of becoming a community-oriented researcher. We want to support that, but we have to be careful of keeping critical distance. If we are, as scholars, to preserve our reputations as dispassionate and fair, even if we're engaged, how do we manage expectations of our funders who are embedded in political systems and of our community partners who often need research in a very timely and very applied way? So these are challenges that we navigate and we contend with and wrestle with. And there's no simple answer to these questions. And a final point I would make, among many that I could, the institutions Brendan has pointed out, I'm pointing to Brendan O'Donnell over there. Brendan O'Donnell has published, he doesn't only compile lists of publications, he also produces scholarly research. And he has pointed out I'll paraphrase my own words, so not to pin it on you, but we can ask how engaged the colleges and universities are to supporting research on English-speaking Quebec in very concrete ways. Where are the courses and the programs and the support for research on English-speaking Quebec? It's scattered, it's spotty, it's irregular. Concordia has done a great job, but there's a lot more that could be done. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, Celine, take it away.
Well, so maybe I can just dovetail right off of that, because I think we did have an opportunity to speak before this panel, and so you and I are on the same page, I think, about a lot of those challenges that we're facing. If I go back to this issue of myths that we're confronting as folks who work in this sector, certainly in the English language post-secondary sector, the kinds of myths that we're dealing with that are very mediatized in this politically charged environment, that our CEGEPs and universities are vectors of Anglicization, that we're forces of assimilation. I've never seen any data to support this idea. Nevertheless, it's a very, very difficult one to counter. And let me just say, I just want to I don't speak on behalf of any of our 9 institutions. I just want to make that very clear. It's one of the challenges that we're facing at the consortium right now is what is our role? Again, we're a very new alliance. We've got 9 independent institutions with their own approaches to research and political positioning. And so we at the consortium right now are sort of trying to grapple with how we engage with this research and these kinds of myths and this politically charged environment that that Lorraine talked about. And maybe, you know, sort of on that challenge, one of the things that we're facing here, the consortium is not mandated. We don't have a strong research capacity yet. We work with a lot of organizations who are doing this kind of thing, and we're headed in that direction. But at the moment, we don't have a strong research capacity. Nevertheless, we are regularly invited to speak on behalf of our membership in many public forums, to deliver briefs, to deliver research at parliamentary commissions, to comment on the media on issues of concern related to English language post-secondary education and Quebec's linguistic minority community. So there's a public perception and expectation that this consortium has a role and responsibility to act in this capacity. And of course, this is largely due to the current political context that we're facing at both a provincial and federal level. So this is something that we're grappling with. We know that there's a real desire for a voice for English language post-secondary education in Quebec. We're trying to figure that out. So I guess in terms of where we're coming from, in trying to build a community of practice and figure out what the consortium can do and how can we work with our partners and how can we leverage and mobilize the research that's being done. And there's some excellent research being done by PERT and by QUESCREN and CIRLM, of course, to reframe this narrative and these myths that are so pervasive. And how can we use evidence-based research to reframe this narrative of our institutions as a positive force for Quebec, as Quebec institutions with a long history here that contribute to building a prosperous, healthy, diverse, vibrant Quebec society. So those are just some of the challenges that we're facing.
Thanks, Celine. So now, Jason.
Il y a 2 situations présentement qui ont attiré mon attention. La première, c'est justement l'idée que en diminuant le financement aux institutions anglophones au Québec, en diminuant la capacité d'accueil aussi, donc en diminuant par la force des choses le financement aussi, on limiterait une dégradation de la place du français au Québec, alors qu'au même moment, dans les institutions qui sont financées pour offrir de l'enseignement en français, où les professeurs habituellement sont embauchés pour faire de la recherche en français, on voit au contraire dans les statistiques, entre autres, par exemple, chez Vincent Larivière, d'une augmentation sans cesse des publications en anglais. Ça, on pourrait se dire, bon, c'est la langue internationale pour la recherche, mais sans aucune attention portée à la langue d'enseignement dans certains départements. Autrement dit, il y a des départements dans des universités francophones où les textes donnés à lire aux étudiants sont à 100% en anglais, où la recherche publiée va être à 100% en anglais. Alors finalement, il reste que le discours, l'enseignement lui-même oralement qui est en français. C'est quand même une situation particulière où on va considérer que des institutions minoritaires dans une province pourraient nuire aux Français, alors que les institutions où la langue d'enseignement est supposée être le français, bien, on a le discours parfois qui est présent de même critiquer des professeurs qui vont publier en français en disant « tu vas nuire à nos statistiques ». Alors, il y a certainement une opposition aussi entre des critères d'excellence, des critères d'accessibilité, des critères de participer à un débat international scientifique. On en parlait ce matin, Richard Bourris et moi. Il y a comme une façon probablement d'équilibrer les choses, de dire bien, il faut qu'on utilise la langue internationale pour la science, c'est certain. Il faut qu'on publie en anglais, mais est-ce qu'on ne pourrait pas de temps en temps se dire, ben, on planifie un collectif en français qui va pouvoir être accessible à nos étudiants, qui permet après ça le lien avec des publications en anglais. Est-ce qu'on ne pourrait pas s'assurer que tous les professeurs publient un 15-20% de leurs textes, qui deviennent des textes d'introduction aussi au champ ou qui permettent un résumé? Donc, il y a des façons de réfléchir ces questions-là, mais je trouve ça quand même étonnant qu'on soit à ce point-là, d'un point de vue gouvernemental, à voir une menace dans les institutions anglophones qui sont minoritaires, alors qu'à peu près rien qui se fait, même d'un point de vue leadership institutionnel, là, à peu près rien qui se fait pour dire, ben, il y a un minimum de textes qu'on exige qui vont être en français. Parce que c'est un peu l'argument qui est servi pour les institutions anglophones. On utilise de l'argent du Québec pour financer de l'enseignement en anglais. Oui, mais les institutions francophones donnent des textes à lire en anglais, puis et il y a certains départements où c'est vraiment devenu 100% des textes qui sont en anglais. Donc, très certainement qu'il y aurait des analyses à faire là-dessus, puis ça rejoint la question des mythes. Est-ce que vraiment on peut mettre sur le dos d'institutions minoritaires une anglicisation ou une perte de vitesse du français, alors que des institutions où les professeurs sont officiellement embauchés pour être professeurs en français dans une institution francophone? Encore là, toujours en tenant compte, évidemment, des critères aussi scientifiques et de la participation au débat international. Mais il y aurait probablement un effet levier beaucoup plus fort d'aller intervenir dans les institutions francophones. Puis si on veut mettre des normes, au lieu de mettre des normes pour limiter dans les institutions anglophones, on pourrait commencer par en mettre pour avoir des contraintes minimales dans les universités francophones. Vous êtes embauché comme professeur francophone dans une université francophone, bien, on exige de vous qu'il y ait tel pourcentage de vos publications qui soient en français, qu'il y ait un certain nombre de textes introductifs qui soient publiés pour vos étudiants et que votre matériel pédagogique soit au moins en partie en français. Alors qu'il n'y a absolument aucune règle à ce sujet-là. Un département, présentement, ne peut même pas être soumis à une volonté institutionnelle parce qu'elle n'existe pas, ces volontés institutionnelles-là. Donc ça, c'est la première situation que je trouve parfois particulière, puis je trouve qu'il mériterait d'être investi. Il y a beaucoup de recherches qui se font, entre autres, par notre collègue Vincent Larivière sur la langue de publication, mais la mettre en contexte, dans le contexte politique actuel au Québec, et de voir, si on veut vraiment faire des analyses de financement de l'enseignement supérieur, là, parce que c'est souvent ça l'argument qui est utilisé par rapport aux institutions anglophones, bien, faisons-les à l'analyse par rapport au financement des institutions francophones. Puis c'est quoi le pourcentage de ce qui se fait qui est en anglais dans ces institutions francophones-là? Puis on aurait une autre analyse qui pourrait participer au débat très certainement. La deuxième chose que je trouve intéressante, qui rejoint là aussi la question des mythes, c'est quand on va voir, par exemple, des écoles anglophones, surtout en région, c'est hors de l'île, évidemment, dans ces cas-là, où le bilinguisme est tel que les jeunes vont parler français ensemble à la récréation, suivre leurs cours en anglais, puis parfois avoir des parents dans un couple exogame, un parle français avec eux, l'autre parle anglais, ou parfois le fait qu'il y ait l'école en anglais va faire en sorte que les parents vont décider de parler français à la maison. Ce qui va se dire parfois, c'est « Ah ben voilà, ces parents-là ont choisi d'avoir l'occasion d'envoyer leurs enfants en anglais. On ne devrait pas pouvoir se permettre ça comme société. Ils devraient aller en français. » Alors que c'est au contraire la preuve la plus réussie d'une intégration complète de ces anglophones-là dans le milieu, d'un souhait d'un grand bilinguisme, d'un souhait que les enfants soient intégrés puis intègrent dans leur vie aussi les deux langues. Alors, il y a ce regard-là porté surtout les écoles dans les commissions scolaires à l'extérieur de Montréal, là, il y a ce regard-là que je trouve toujours étonnant, comme si on voyait ces écoles-là comme étant devenues des écoles d'immersion, alors que c'est plutôt des ayants droit qui ont tellement intégré le français dans leur vie qu'ils peuvent faire le choix de dire, bien, l'anglais, ce sera pour l'école, puis pour un bout de temps, on va parler français avec eux à la maison. Alors ça, je trouve que ça fait partie des mythes aussi. La mise en contexte de la vie de générations d'anglophones qui ont de plus en plus intégré le français dans leur vie. Je trouve ça malheureux que ça devienne parfois comme conclusion l'idée de dire, ben, qu'est-ce qui fait qu'ils vont à l'école en anglais puis qu'on finance une scolarisation en anglais alors qu'ils parlent français dans la cour de récréation. Puis on commence à voir ça même dans des textes. Et je trouve ça malheureux parce que c'est vraiment un haut niveau d'intégration de bilinguisme qui qui amène ça. L'autre chose que je voudrais...
Jason,
tu sais,
désolé, il faut que je te coupe parce que
Ah
sinon
oui.
il n'y a pas ton Eric. Okay, so Eric, now we can discuss it later
Désolé,
over
sur-
wine and everything, but thank you very
sur une
much,
lancée.
Eric.
Ça ouvre des questions, des discussions qu'on pourra sûrement reprendre avec l'audience. Donc, la recherche en contexte minoritaire, c'est sûr que c'est un objet d'étude qui est politisé. Hein, on sent que le public il juge les résultats des travaux qu'on produit en fonction non seulement ou pas vraiment en fonction de la valeur scientifique des résultats de recherche, mais en fonction de la récupération politique ou l'usage qu'on peut en faire. Donc ça, on le sent. Puis moi, je veux dire, ça fait maintenant 20 ans que je suis à l'Institut, donc j'ai vécu toutes sortes d'expériences, puis on sent l'attente qui existe qui pèse un peu sur nos épaules quand on fait de la recherche. Et le défi pour le chercheur en contexte minoritaire, donc qui travaille dans un contexte qui a des attentes, on s'attend à ce qu'on travaille vraiment pour les communautés. Je l'ai encore entendu ce midi. L'Institut canadien de recherche, c'est travaille pour les minorités. Il y a un biais ou il y a une sympathie, du moins, vis-à-vis de notre objet d'étude. Puis c'est vrai qu'il y a une forme d'engagement derrière cette recherche-là. Mais en même temps, moi, je sens qu'il a fallu que je négocie à l'intérieur de moi, puis vis-à-vis de mon environnement de travail, un espace de travail, un espace de liberté aussi, une certaine distance par rapport à mon objet. Puis j'ai pu faire des recherches, surtout au début, je dirais, où je ne mesurais pas nécessairement toujours l'impact politique ou l'impact que pouvaient avoir les résultats de la recherche sur la communauté. J'étais peut-être un peu téméraire aussi. J'ai fait des recherches qui ont déplu à la communauté. Puis on me le dit, on m'a envoyé des lettres en disant les résultats là, que tu as publiés, là, ça nous sert pas. Là. Puis on nous le fait savoir. Puis j'ai reçu des lettres vraiment fâchées là, des gens qui... Donc, il y a cette distance-là que je veux maintenir. Là, je parle vraiment à mon nom personnel, même si je travaille au sein d'un institut qui a certaines sympathies vis-à-vis son objet d'étude. Donc, pour moi, c'est vraiment important de, néanmoins, de vraiment garder un rapport rigoureux par rapport à son objet d'étude. Et il y a tout, on parle beaucoup des mythes, des idées fausses qui circulent autour de notre objet d'étude. On a un rôle à jouer à ce niveau-là. Et puis là, moi, je dirais qu'on a un savoir-faire à développer au niveau de la communication scientifique. Et moi, j'ai pas appris à faire de la communication scientifique en dehors vraiment des colloques académiques. On apprend ça un peu sur le tas. Alors que pour moi, ça devrait être vraiment un savoir, ça devrait être un métier même de vulgariser les connaissances. Je le répète de plus en plus, j'en suis de plus en plus convaincu. Il devrait y avoir des gens formés pour faire ce travail-là. Nous, on le fait du mieux qu'on peut, qu'on est amené à le faire. Il y a des chercheurs qui ne vont pas faire le choix d'aller vers la vulgarisation scientifique parce que pour le CV, ce n'est pas nécessairement ce qu'il y a de plus payant. On va laisser ça à d'autres. Mais moi, je sens qu'il y a vraiment ici, là, quand on parle de gap, là, mais il y a un gap au niveau du transfert des connaissances qui reste encore à travailler beaucoup. Et puis, on doit le faire pour nourrir le débat, pour justement déconstruire des mythes. Et puis ça passe plus. Puis j'ai reçu dernièrement un guide de l'ACFAS, guide de vulgarisation scientifique, je crois, un petit guide pratique, bien fait. Puis Jason pourra parler aussi d'une étude qu'ils ont fait sur la mobilisation des connaissances. C'est un guide aussi que vous avez fait. Vraiment, on a besoin d'être outillés pour faire ce travail-là. Et puis, ils donnent des trucs. Et ils disent, hein, ce matin, on parlait de biais de confirmation. Ils reconnaissent qu'on est confronté à des biais de confirmation auprès du public à qui on s'adresse. Donc, ce qui va faire changer d'idée les gens, ce n'est pas nécessairement des idées nouvelles ou des faits nouveaux, des nouvelles données qu'on apporte au public. Parce qu'ils ont des biais de confirmation, puis ils vont pouvoir rejeter ce qui ne va pas dans le sens de leur croyance, de leur vision du monde. C'est plus un travail de communication, puis il donne des trucs. Comment est-ce qu'on peut faire ce travail-là de communication scientifique? Ça, je trouve ça vraiment intéressant, mais moi, je pense que là, je vais m'y mettre de plus en plus pour développer cette compétence-là. Je pense que c'est vraiment une compétence qu'on doit développer comme chercheur pour le faire de plus en plus, pour apporter des nuances aussi. On parle de nuances souvent qui manquent dans les discours qui circulent sur les minorités linguistiques. On doit apporter ces nuances-là. Pas seulement corriger des perceptions, mais c'est vraiment de nuancer aussi des perceptions. Donc, il y a un travail à faire de ce côté-là. Il y a un savoir-faire à développer. Il y a des ressources à mobiliser. Là, s'il y a des bailleurs de fonds dans la salle, il faut investir. Puis je pense que ça se fait déjà, mais il faut continuer à investir dans tout ce travail de mobilisation des connaissances que fait, entre autres, le QUESCREN, qui va continuer à le faire. Puis c'est une réflexion collective qu'on doit faire ensemble entre les différents organismes, les chercheurs, pour essayer d'identifier des besoins au niveau des connaissances. Puis comment est-ce qu'on peut y répondre? Comment est-ce qu'on peut y répondre de façon à rejoindre le public, à rejoindre la communauté? Fait que je m'arrêterai ici pour...
Merci, Éric. So our next question for our speakers is, how can research better inform linguistic debates? So how can we ensure that research on English-speaking Quebec can facilitate positive change? Is there anyone who'd like to take that first?
Mais je dirais qu'en comprenant aussi comment fonctionnent les mythes, ça peut être déjà un point de départ, parce qu'on parle beaucoup de mythes, d'idées reçues. Il y a une compréhension, une analyse qu'on peut faire des mythes aussi. Comment est-ce que les mythes s'imposent ou se diffusent dans les sociétés au sujet des minorités, des groupes linguistiques? Si on peut comprendre comment est-ce que fonctionne un mythe, on peut peut-être comprendre comment est-ce qu'on peut les défaire ou à partir des faits nouveaux. Puis il y a des différences entre les communautés. Si on compare, par exemple, il n'y a pas vraiment de communauté anglophone, il y a des communautés, il y a des groupes anglophones, il y a une diversité très forte qu'on observe. Dans les communautés francophones, il y a peut-être il y a des mythes différents aussi qui renvoient à une réalité communautaire différente dans ces communautés-là. Et donc, ça va être différent la manière qu'on va s'y prendre pour critiquer ou défaire des idées qui sont plutôt des mythes selon les communautés. Donc, je pense que c'est d'étudier comment est-ce que les mythes se forment, comment est-ce que les idées se forment, puis ça reflète souvent des réalités sociales, des rapports sociaux qui sont différents d'une communauté à l'autre. Puis, bon, le sociologue que je suis va avoir tendance à penser que pour changer des perceptions, il faut aussi changer les relations entre les groupes. Ça passe par une transformation des relations. Puis, quand on parle de loi linguistique, de droit linguistique dans différentes provinces, on parle d'une volonté de transformer les relations entre les groupes. On veut tendre vers l'égalité. Ça veut dire que ça passe par une certaine... On parle d'égalité réelle avec la nouvelle loi sur les langues officielles là, qui va être adoptée éventuellement, prochainement. Donc, ça suppose qu'il y a une transformation des relations, au moins dans le droit, hein, mais qui devrait se refléter dans la réalité sociale aussi derrière ça. Donc, on tend vers une transformation des relations sociales entre les groupes linguistiques qui devrait éventuellement aussi se refléter dans les perceptions qu'on a vis-à-vis les groupes.
So I think that's actually a very difficult question. So, I mean, spoiler alert, I don't think there's one magic answer or silver bullet to that, but I do think more and more I'm thinking just about the importance of just trust and honesty when you work in research. I think, Lorraine, you just talked about, keeping that critical distance, even though you might be personally invested, right? And the stakes are high, especially right now where, based on your identity, you are doing research that, could maybe affect the outcomes, right, of you as an individual. So I think it's challenging in research to do that, but I think it's so important to just go back to that principle of, trust is something that is so important, especially now, where we're dealing with misinformation and there's more information than we can handle, that you really have to, as an organization, as a researcher, just maintain that level of whatever you're putting out, right? There's a trust bid that you're putting in that if you break that trust, people aren't really going to listen to what you have to say. So that's one thing. And it's not easy to always maintain people's trust because mistakes can happen too. But I do think that the principle of honesty always shines through in your work. If you always come into the work and say, there's some things to this research that might not support my perspective, right? Or they might add so much complexity that we don't even know where we're at anymore. What is the obvious solution? But at least you're engaging in the research and in the conversation in an honest way, and other people can then, engage with your research. And that's where the magic really happens, when you now have dialogue of, organizations and researchers that are all being honest, and then they're all acknowledging what's really happening. And then they say, okay, now what are the solutions? So I don't know the answer, but I think that's a good start.
Thank you. It's very true. Just acknowledging the fact that how difficult it is, because I know at QUESCREN this is something we're always, well, Lorraine could definitely say more about that, but how do we actually, make an impact? And it's difficult. Like what forms, Lorraine?
Yeah, I realized we devised these questions, and in the first one we talked about critical distance, and in the second one we're saying how can we improve things, which is kind of assuming a sort of parti pris, which kind of highlights the world we navigate in. So I wanted to look at sort of ecosystem issues again. One is a structural change. So we need, boy, do I ever sound like an advocate? Okay, I'll cool down. It would be wonderful if the Institut de la Statistique du Québec, which is so conveniently an institute located in the same ministry where William Flock works, they turn out a lot of material. I get alerts from them, I would say daily. They do not use language data pretty well at all. I look at every single release. I always type in, a word search, language, anglais, langage, and they don't look at that unless it's something very specific about education. And the Secretariat is aware and with us on this. It would be something we can do as a group if we're working in concert, if we're working with government and community partners, is to, I think a very beneficial effect on English-speaking Quebec would be if the government itself kept data and publicized data on the conditions of English-speaking Quebecers, so that those many, many fantastic student studies coming out highlighted that data. So that's something, it's not really what research could do, but let's say engaged dialogue, like STA is referring to, with our partners. Another thing that's also challenging, actually, is building meaningful links with research groups in the Francophone research milieu. So I personally had the experience of presenting something on English-speaking Quebec in a very French environment with Francophone researchers, and actually got some pushback and criticism. And so we need to build the relationship of trust with other researchers too, and to to be sensitive to concerns and preoccupations, and have an honest dialogue, so that thinking about English-speaking Quebec goes beyond those devoted to studying English-speaking Quebec, so that people studying Quebec, people producing data about Quebec, are also looking at English-speaking Quebec, among many other social groups.
Thanks, Lorraine. So what we're going to do now is actually open up the floor to questions from the audience.
I just want to pick up on something Lorraine said, because in the research that we do, STA talk about it soon as well, we're very often presented with data that's of interest to the Francophones or the Francophone minority. So what language do you speak when you're in the shower? We know that. Is there an oversample of Anglophones for the labor force survey that tells us what the unemployment rates are? No, we get to find that out once every 5 or 10 years. So there is that aspect to availability of data. A few years ago, we tried to work with CMHC because there's the homeless problem in Montreal. How many homeless people are Anglophones? No idea. because CMHC has amazing data on homelessness. They don't collect by language variable. So when, and this is a story now more than a question, but when a few years ago, when there was work being done by CIRLM and others for the post-census survey that's going to be next year, there was a group of us in the community, Yans here, who didn't want them to spend the money on the post-census survey. We wanted them to take that money, about $5 million or so, and we wanted to give to StatsCan and ESDC to oversample labor market survey, labor force survey, so we have these unemployment numbers. But it's a machine. So we have a lot of stats on what's important to the other minority. And that's just a general comment.
Thank you. This is a question I know that the members of our speakers would be interested to know. Are there any recommendations for the topic for this special journal issue that Jason has mentioned? If anyone has any suggestions for that, I know that would be great to hear.
Did we present the journal, the issue with, we have some paper that are intended for this issue, but the one from PERT, it was presented, yeah.
So 3 separate articles in that issue. There's also an article that's going to be prepared by PERT on different statistics on English-speaking workforce and different statistics on English-speaking Quebec. So if you have any other suggestions, if there are things you'd find very interesting to see in that issue, please feel very free to comment or give suggestions, because we'll be publishing the call for papers in a month or two, and after that we'll be welcoming articles. And of course, if you have organizations where people are interested in submitting articles, it's open to everyone.
I wanted to add, we QUESCREN, we're just about to start a project like Monday on research briefs. So we're doing a series of short research documents on English speaking Quebec. We have 15 that we're going to produce. So in addition to Jason's request, we're also looking for ideas not only on subjects, but how you would like data presented. Like what if you had a short document, especially community members and policy people, if you were to read a short document, what would you like it to look like? Would it be, mostly infographics? Would it be a video?
Hi, everyone. I work with the CHSN. We have a lot of research and a lot of data, as most of you know. But I would love that we would have some meetings where we actually put all this data on a table together, because I feel we are ourselves, and just in some of the work I've been doing on the ground, because I'm the community development person on the island of Montreal for CHSN. And I'm noticing even within our own organizations in the English-speaking community, I was actually really surprised how siloed they were from each other, let alone from the rest of the community. So we are siloed within our own community, and it becomes a little bit of a habit to stay in those silos. And I'm really interested in us sitting down and having conversations where the research and the data that we're all collecting is collectively put together, and we actually look at it collectively instead of just looking at it individually from our organization's perspectives, but look at it together and then listen to each other's perspectives so that we can create something from that data collectively. Anyway, that's why.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Yeah, well, we're starting to get such a structure off the ground. So the data roundtable that I mentioned earlier, which is supported by QCGN, it's our data roundtable is chaired by CEDEC, John Buck of CEDEC, and me. And we're just starting year 2 of this initiative, and that's exactly what it's for, actually, to have that kind of dialogue and exchange of knowledge, and also where to move forward as well. What are the priority areas we need to work on? the information, how does it get back out?
When I was working on the ground, like you do these research projects get done, and then they, you know, the cliche of them getting put onto a shelf, and they're never. And I had a conversation with someone, Maria, we were having that conversation yesterday about how research sometimes gets done, and then you're going on to the next project and the next project, and those, you're not actually utilizing it to its actual. It could be very useful to different people. And when I'm out there on the ground with organizations and I'm trying to bring them information and bring them interesting research, but at the same time, they're the frontline people who are in, you know, they're in the crisis, they're always in reaction. And they're also, as nonprofit organizations, put into situations where they are they're not given that time by funders even to have that reflection and look at their own situations and what they are living within their communities. And then when we talk about minority communities, they're not even sitting at those tables where their representation, like I'm looking right now at Montreal, how many of our organizations have voices at tables where the information that's really important within the community. And we heard this morning our own Black community, how did their voices get brought to the tables where these policy then and decision-making and monies that are coming down get put into the right places, because obviously there isn't this, the money isn't there's not like this non-ending fund, we're sharing it. And so anyway, this is just where I am in the sort of like drifting from the different worlds from below, you know, the grassroots and then up into the policy place.
I just have a suggestion. Kathy and I are with the Regional Development Network, so we're inherently interested in what's going on in the regions of Quebec for English speakers. And we've heard a lot today, but it's been pretty Montreal focused, right? So in your call for papers, I would be interested in seeing some calls for papers around the communities that live off island. You know, they're negotiating the challenges that you guys are talking about with a complete lack of infrastructure. You know, no transport en commun. There's several layers of things that those communities are dealing with that exacerbate, you know, some of the issues that we've spoken about today. So I think that might be something interesting to throw in there.
And a question which is rather broad, related to what we've already really spoken about, is recommendations for the future of research. Are we talking about, you know, breaking silos, getting the research to the people who can make the difference or make the rules that make the difference? Are there any more suggestions related to this? Any particular strategies people find useful in terms of bringing research into the hands of people who can make the changes? Wendy?
I'm Wendy Reed, just recently retired prof from HEC Montreal. My area of study is in fact cultural management, arts management. So my suggestion might be, a lot of what we're talking about is very formal university-based research or association research, but there's an awful lot of research that's done by arts organizations, by artists, who are then mobilizing it and vulgarizing it in some very interesting ways to large publics and small publics, and developing conversations cross communities, not just so you don't get feedback from a Francophone scholars community. And so I'm thinking that there may be, and as well, a lot of arts organizations are very preoccupied, increasingly so, with social impact. And we all know, and we've been talking about this over lunch, about the tremendous impact that studying art as at a young age and through life does mobilize employment skills, well-being, and societal well-being. So there may be, and Jason and I talked about this earlier today, a possibility of an issue with regards to minority linguistic or minority cultural groups across the country and the kind of community impacts they have with regards to that. But maybe there's something even more with bringing in artists to the conversation that could mobilize these issues in a broader conversation. And not that the arts are that broad, high arts anyway, but it's just something that struck me right now.
Thank you so much. So we have 2 minutes left, so if we could have any quick comments. I believe we had one person and then a person in the back, and then we'll wrap it up.
It was just basically to answer the question that was put by you or by Jennifer as to how can you spread the word as to things that are published for everybody. Well, I'm a scientist by training, and we have this thing, I don't know if it still exists, called current contents. Does it still exist? Why don't you have something like that in this area? So you send the current contents out to everybody with whatever has been published in the previous month, the week, however much is required, and everybody sees all the titles, and you decide where you go get the information. It's not that complicated. At least I don't think so.
Thank you for that. We can talk about that. We can talk about that further. Thank you. And we have one more question or comment.
Yes, more of a comment. Carson Paul, I'm with the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, the Official Languages Centre of Excellence. I just want to thank the organizers and everyone who's participating. This is an excellent research symposium. On the question of how research can be made relevant, I think the communities are the first port of call. Like, they need to feel that the research is fed back to them. From my perspective, when we inform decision makers, I'll say something maybe a little bit provocative. I would say surprise and entertain. And surprise, I think the advantage of researchers, and this was kind of talked about a little bit here, you come with a question that you don't necessarily know the answer to. And a lot of politics, policy making, it comes with, this is where we want to get to. We know that the destination, give me the arguments, okay? So the research has the advantage of saying, okay, we looked at this, and guess what? It's not what we initially thought. So when we feed things up to the minister, she's already, she knows where she wants to go and everything, but what she doesn't know is, are there surprising things that I don't know? Tell me something that I don't know. So that's a surprise element, and I think research is well positioned for that. And the second one is the entertain element. I don't mean this sort of in a derogatory way. I don't mean to demean the solid nature of research, but often what I find in presentations is you throw up the numbers and everything, and then you tell me what you did in your research and who you interviewed. And you remember, Jason, when you talked about the Anglophones who are so well integrated in their schools, and they speak ils parlent français dans la cour. Okay, wow, this is, we know that this is a fact for the Francophone minority communities, where we think it's, unfortunately, they speak English, right, during recess, Here, in Quebec, it's seen as a sign of, full integration, okay? So, but it takes that example, to create an image in someone's mind. And then when that gets to, a senior policymaker, when they have their discussions, they won't say, well, 51% of English speakers, 66% of the youth is 80%, they speak French at a, no. Tell me something what you mentioned, okay? That sticks. So I think on those two counts, like surprise and entertain, if research can do that, then we, as who work as public servants, have an easier time feeding something that's that piques the interest of the decision maker. Thank you.
Thank you so much.